Is it ready, Monty?
Start, please.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, hamdan kasiran tayyiban mubarakan fi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome all viewers to our regular Ramadan with Quran program. We have a special program today to mark the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. We know that International Day to Combat Islamophobia is an international observance designated by United Nations in 2022, taking place on 15 March every year in worldwide. The date March 15 was chosen as it is an anniversary of the Christchurch mosque shooting in New Zealand, in which 51 people were killed during Friday prayer. The first thing in this discussion, we need to be define Islamophobia. The main topics here is Islamophobia. So as a general knowledge, the Islamophobia is an extreme fear of and hostility towards Islam and Muslim, which often leads to a hate speech, hate crimes, as well as a social and political discrimination. It can be used to rationalize policies and can influence domestic and foreign policy. According to the all-party parliamentary group APPG, Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness and perceived Muslimness. We have two prominent and well-known guest speaker here. Our first guest is Dr. Abdul Bari. He is well-known writer, teacher, and community leader. He is a former secretary of Muslim Aid, a former chair of East London Mosque, and a former general secretary of Muslim Council of Britain. And he is the current chair of Advisory Council of MCA. So as we know that Islamophobia manifests itself in a public and private spaces where Muslims are viewed as a suspect and unwelcome. In workplace discrimination where Muslim practices such as wearing a scarf and praying are prohibited. In tradition and social media and political discourses where Muslims are portrayed as a violent and untrustworthy. In this current situation, Dr. Bari, would you please explain us the extent of Islamophobia in the UK? Dr. Bari.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa ashabi azmain. Jazakumullah khair, Chair. Jazakumullah khair for your explanation of the topic, and also it's very relevant now, the things that are happening in this country, and organizations like Muslim Council of Britain and others are struggling to address this issue. So it's a very apt topic. Thanks for inviting me. And also it's good that Khalid Sofi, is a prominent lawyer, is also going to talk on this. We haven't talked, but hopefully he will address the legal side mainly. I'll more or less discuss the general historical and other side. So I will start with the topic that I have thought is Islamophobia, origins, symptoms, and way out. And any topic of this nature, for any topic of this nature, the name Europe comes first. So Europe has been historically the root causes of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. Why I'll just briefly mention. Europe was a violent continent before even Renaissance. We all know this. It's called sort of Dark Ages at the time. And armed with material knowledge, but without moral and spiritual constraint. So it came with Renaissance. Material knowledge came, spiritual constraint was not there. It became a colonizer continent. So before and after, Europe has been prominent in worse things in humanity, unfortunately. Obviously, there are some positive, definitely positive things. The colonialism, settler colonialism, as you would be knowing, that meaning taking over other people's land through barbaric ethnic cleansing or even genocide. That happened in Australia, New Zealand, America, South America. So once it fell on its own sword in World War I and World War II, that was the internal fight that became global wars, and lost its colonies, its own settler colony, America. America has been a settler colony. As the new superpower, it started dominating the world and doing exactly the same thing that Europe has been doing. And with a very post-colonial Machiavellian politics and George Orwellian dystopia through economic, political, military, and media hegemony. Okay, to understand Europe and the West, there are a few examples I just want to mention. Pre-Renaissance violence, so that we know where they come from. The Crusades, 1096 to 1291. The whole purpose was to capture and control the Holy Land of Palestine through massacres, destructions, killing, etc. And Salahuddin Ayyubi won over the Jerusalem in 1187. Then 100 Years' War from 1337 to 1453, over 100 years. Violent conflicts between England and France. Reconquista, 711 to 492, a period in which Christian kingdoms in the Iberian Peninsula, that means Spain and Portugal, sought to reconquer territories from the Muslim rule that ended up with so much of violence. Number 4, Spanish Inquisition, 1478 to 1834, established by Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, to identify heretics. Heretics mean those who are not following into the so-called theology of Trinity Church, and conversos, Jews and Muslims who forcefully converted to Christianity, but they were suspected of practicing their previous faith in secret. It led to the persecution, torture, and executions of thousands and thousands of Muslims and Jews. Number 5, Wars of the Roses. The Roses means dozen rose. 1455 to 1487. A series of civil wars in England, within England, between the House of Lancaster and the House of York for control of the throne, resulting in political instability and bloodshed. Okay, so the second topic that I want to discuss is the Muslims as victims of racism and Islamophobia. Why? During their colonial enterprise, Britain and France mainly, there are other colonial powers. Britain and France were the superior force as colonial powers. Their mastery in divide and conquest policy or divide and rule policy in their colonies of Asia and Africa, with their colonial education system and political system. This was hugely exacerbated in Muslim lands, because non-Muslim lands were also taken in Africa, by the Orientalists, who tried to put doubts of Islamic theology and Muslim history among Muslims. Orientalism, there's a book by Edward Said. Why did Europe colonize other people's lands? Because they saw themselves as superior and others as inferior, a manifestation of pure racism. For Black people, whether Christian or not, because there are many Black Christians, racism is their primary source of victimhood, just the color. George Floyd in the US a few years ago was murdered just because he was a Black. Diana Abbott, here, the former Shadow Home Secretary, has been recently treated so harshly because she is a Black and she is a woman. So these are unfortunate things in this country. As overwhelming Muslims are non-European and non-white, there is a massive element of racism mixed up with Islamophobia for Muslims. Okay. Third thing, a brief history of Zionism entering the game. How Zionism entered into the fold of Islamophobia. Jewish people who were persecuted and scattered by the Roman Empire because they were thrown out from the Roman Empire in the first century, 70 AD, across 3 continents, means Europe, Asia, and Africa. But they lived in peace with Muslims and in Muslim lands wherever they went. They flourished in Muslim Spain and all other places. When Muslims lost Spain, Sephardic Jews, those who were settled there, they are called Sephardic Jews, became victims of Ferdinand and Isabella and Christianity, but were given shelter by the Ottoman Empire in different places of the empire. The Mizrahi Jews who lived in Middle East after they were thrown out from Roman Empire in 70, Middle East and Africa had always lived in harmony with Muslims. But European Jews, known as the Ashkenazi, had always tough time in Europe facing anti-Semitism. Because for Europe, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia just go side by side. In England and other places, you have probably heard of The Merchant of Venice, the novel by Shakespeare. And from England, Jews were thrown out in 1290. And after 400 years, they were taken in. And who did the Holocaust? It was the Germany. In German and German-occupied territories, nearly 6 million Jews were just slaughtered and massacred. So Europe has this bloody history. From this guilt of Holocaust, public anti-Semitism subsided in Europe. But secular European Ashkenazi Jews, I mention again, secular European Ashkenazi Jews, they are not practicing, who pioneered in modern intellectual, academic, and political life because they flourished in Europe, academically, media, and otherwise, convinced Britain, the superpower at that time, to have a land somewhere. Europe, particularly Britain, found a way of dumping the Jews in Muslim Palestine. It was not British land, it was a Muslim land, but they did this. This was a strategic move, in my opinion, killing 2 birds by 1 stone. One, getting rid of their inherent Jewish problem or anti-Semitism that causes anti-Semitism. 2, keeping the Arabs and Muslims subjugated by giving them their land in Palestine, with Jerusalem and Palestine and Al-Aqsa Mosque in there. By that time, by the early 20th century, Arabs were aroused to revolt. It was done by Britain to revolt against the weak Ottomans. Ottomans became very weak. And simultaneously, Britain gave money to Sharif Hussain of Makkah and Abdul Aziz bin Saud for Saudi Arabia. Simultaneously, there are books on this as well. Europe wanted to destroy the Ottomans, and politically naive, Islamically weak Arab leaders fell into the trap. Ottomans lost its Arab territories, and the dirty game of secular Zionists and British political establishment gave rise to Palestine as a Jewish homeland. However, the mostly secular Zionists, with the European art of ethnic cleansing in the past, did the same to the Palestinians in 1948. And that's a big history. This is encapsulated by prominent Jewish historian Ilan Pappé in his phenomenal book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. I think everybody should read this book to know the history. Decades of Zionist ethnic cleansing in Palestine from 48 onwards, bringing settlers mostly from Western countries, Western white settlers, and politically they've just convinced some of the Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews to come, but they are treated as second or third class Jews, to occupy the whole country was going on with Western support. America, as the most powerful superpower, fully became part of this dark game. The recent Gaza genocide by Israel with 100% military and political support from the US and its allies is obviously a crime that Israel is publicly boasting about. What Israel is doing is not hiding anything. They are boasting about how they are bulldozing things, killing people, children, women, and others. Now, coming to Britain and the West, overall West, look at the way how serious are the issues of Islamophobia in Britain, especially in the Tory government. This was documented by the MCB some years ago and submitted to the government, but the government sat over it and totally ignored Islamophobia over the years. Now, to silence Muslim voice and voice of those who support Muslims and Palestinian justice path, the government is trying to, today there will be big news, or there is already big news, with the new definition of extremism that can catch any Muslim organization. And this is not new. After coming to power in 2010, the initial Tory-led coalition government reviewed the present agenda and brought in the concept of non-violent extremism. So what's the difference between that definition in 2011 and current definition, new definition? It's just a one level up, that's it. And decided not to engage with many Muslim organizations, including MCB. Although in different governments and ministers worked with Muslim MCB. In fact, since 2011, Muslim activists like us became non-violent extremists. The comments coming out from this government regarding Muslims who are simply asking for a Gaza ceasefire in peaceful demonstrations, along with massive British public support, including many Jews, are just manifestation of Islamophobia. Former Home Secretary Suella Braverman called these demonstrations as hate marches. You probably know this. Former Deputy Chairman of the Tory party said London is under Islamist control. Michael Gove, the arch Islamophobe, who wrote a book called Celsius 77 in 2006 and turned an education issue in some Birmingham schools into Trojan horse affair, is now leading the Islamophobia agenda. Sadly, Islamophobia in recent times has also raised its ugly teeth in Burmese Buddhism and worryingly amongst India's RSS Hindutva group led by Prime Minister Modi's BJP government. And that is another big worry because 200 million Muslims live in India. What are the symptoms of Islamophobia? Several factors contribute to its perpetuation, including, say, media sensationalism, political agendas, ignorance, misconceptions about Islam and Muslims. The rise of far-right extremism and the amplification of online hate speech have further exacerbated the problem, because far-right extremism has gripped more or less the whole of Western society. So they are creating an environment of hostility and disgust against Muslims. Islamophobia manifests itself in many ways, ranging from verbal abuse and discrimination to systematic marginalization and violent attacks. So our sisters, women who wear hijab, they face this, and students who make some naive comments in these schools, they face this to prevent. Hate crimes targeting Muslims have surged manifold in recent months. You will only hear anti-Semitism has risen fivefold, but Islamophobia has risen fivefold as well. Government ministers do not say this. Fueled by misinformation, fear-mongering, and political rhetoric. When political leaders say from the top, that goes through filters to the media. Media is virtually complicit to some extent, and common people. Muslims are people of color, that means black or brown and others, continue to face discrimination and prejudice simply because of their faith or ethnicity. This trend not only undermines the values of tolerance and diversity that we cherish, but also poses a significant threat to social cohesion and harmony. I'm now going to say a few things that Peter Oborn, who wrote a wonderful book, and I suggested that people should read this book, that is highly relevant for this topic today. And he says in his book, The Fate of Abraham, the fall of Berlin Wall and collapse of communism put the America-led West with its secular democracy as the dominant force in the world. In the aftermath of 9/11, some Western think tanks conveniently found radical Islam or global jihadist movements, this is their term, as their number one enemy. This simplistic black and white demarcation of Muslims, good or bad, became a mantra in Western establishment circles, led by American and British think tanks, such as Rand Corporation. Policy Exchange, Rand Corporation in America, and Policy Exchange, Henry Jackson Society, quite a few others in this country. They have been shaping adverse opinions on Muslims through their publications and high connections with influential people like Michael Gove himself was the chair of Policy Exchange, first chairman. Peter Aubin particularly mentions Michael Gove in this book, conservative senior politician and the first chairman of Policy Exchange, and Dean Godson as masterminds shaping the think tank's policy towards Muslims. From 2005, Peter Aubin mentions, onwards, Dean Godson seems to have been on a mission to rip up the counter-terrorism strategy adopted by successive British governments. They were not happy with because there were not enough anti-Muslims. So Dean Godson promoted the new strategy, a new approach to Muslims through research papers, seminars, not least media muscle, Peter Aubin adds. An observation that is highlighted is the big shift in the British Conservative Party, his own party, from the center ground of caution, skepticism, and pragmatism of the past. Because Peter Aubin was part of Conservative Party, and he knew that Conservative Party in general was cautious, skeptic, and pragmatic. But he again mentions Michael Gove, who wrote a book titled Celsius 77, as I mentioned. In that book, Gove says, or he declared that Islamists were on the march and that the West had collectively failed to act. So Islamists are going to take over the whole of the West. Aubin particularly blames the Tory party's role in the era of this new McCarthyism in British politics. McCarthyism came from America after the Second World War. Senator McCarthy. He treated his opponents as communists. Prejudice against Islam or Islamophobia is arguably the UK's last remaining socially respectable form of bigotry, he says. This means there is very little social, political, or cultural protection for Muslims. As far as the British political, media, and literary establishment is concerned, the normal rules of engagement do not apply. He says that. Aubin also writes with his characteristic forensic analysis about the Birmingham school Trojan horse affairs I just highlighted before a bit, the prevalent agenda, etc., the grooming of gangs saga, the fall of Muslim Tory Party chair Baroness Wassi. This was virtually he complains that it was due to Michael Gove who more or less got rid of Baroness Wassi. All this, he says, was a distressing catalogue of cynically cultivated bigotry, much of it based on outright fabrications or Islamophobia. Towards the end of the book, Aubin mentions a number of hot spots where Muslims have been the victims of the so-called war on terror rather than perpetrators. According to him, Huntington's false prophecy may seem to have come true with 9/11, but in reality they didn't. Not a single Muslim majority country has declared war on the US, nor have we seen an Islamic government forming anywhere. Okay, towards the end, catching the bull by the horn. How do you address this issue? In the midst of continuous negative portrayal of Muslims, there seems to be genuine fear in wider society that Islamist aliens are taking over this land. Aliens. Whilst many Muslims feel under siege and tend to think they are probably subject to a McCarthyite witch hunt, others still question Muslims' place in this land, and if they are part of a Trojan horse entrism plot. Entrism is a political term. Muslims, if they join Labour Party or Conservative Party, they are treated as infiltrators that are taking over Conservative and Tory Labour Party. They are called entrists. They are called Trojan horse. Whereas other communities can do this easily. And whereas Muslims are probably the weakest community in this country, and their political participation, media participation is very, very weak. Even then, they are portrayed as those who want to take over this country. You know, this technique of turning victims into aggressors, dehumanizing them is a symbol of genocide. And Europe, West are master in more or less dehumanizing certain category of people and turn them into aggressors, where in reality they are the victims. There is also another factor. The rising number of Muslims, consisting of 6.5% population now from 2021 census, is a big proportion, subhanallah. 6.5 in England and Wales. The Scottish figure is another different. And at the top, on top of this, is school population, because Muslims have population is essentially young population. British school population is actually 10%, around 10 or 11 or 9 to 11%. Essentially, 1/10 of British school children are of Islamic origin, Muslim origin. It has worried many politicians, social activists in the mainstream society, academics, and others, media people. Although the community suffers far higher levels of deprivation, we are socially deprived, economically deprived, politically deprived. We came from four corners of the world, from the rural background. Our participation in the mainstream or civil society in politics is nominal. Our media percentage participation per person is only 4.4% compared to 6.5% population. And this 0.4%, those who are in the Muslim in the media from the Muslim community, they don't have any Muslim agenda. They are just there because of their career. So in a way, Muslims are simply absent in the mainstream media. But even then, we are taking over this country. This country has become Islamist control. This is just a fantasy, but this fantasy is being believed, deliberately believed, and certain overseas lobbyists trying to promote that. So Muslims are mostly living in a few inner city areas. Where do the Muslims live? Recently, educated Muslims are moving to different parts of the country, but mostly in about a dozen inner city countries, like say Tower Hamlets, like say Luton, Bradford. These are historically deprived areas, and there is no way political challenge can come from this sort of inner city areas. But this is the fantasy world that they are trying to create. They don't have the level playing field with many other communities. Level playing field is something that you only can compete with similar level of people. Say example, Arsenal is one of the big teams. I'm just mentioning this as a football team. A small county football team cannot even dare to play with this, with Arsenal or Man City. In the same way, Muslims being deprived, socially deprived, economically deprived, still poor, politically deprived, no political participation in a big way, and also intellectually we are far behind because of the historical colonialism, so there's no level playing field. There's no competition as such. While there is no competition, we don't match. On the other hand, we are portrayed as trying to invade this country, Islamize this country. And in 2010, someone called Andrew Gilligan made a film, Britain's Islamic Republic. Tower Hamlets would become an Islamic Republic, and it will take over the whole of the country. And for that, MCS forerunner IFU was criticized, Islamic Mosque was criticized, I was criticized. After now 13 years, has there been any Islamic state in Tower Hamlets? Well, Michael Gove is also trying to unseat Labour executive mayor in Tower Hamlets. So this is sort of madness, and Muslims don't feel empowered to have high-level interaction with the wider society. One is Muslims don't have the capacity, and educated Muslims also do not feel confident and competent enough to do this. Pakistani and Bangladeshi and other communities. Okay, so many Muslims are socially unaware even what is happening around us today. Many Muslims are even unaware. apart from, say, people in this in this group, or some other groups which are more or less politically conscious of the wider society. Description of Muslims as a demographic time bomb. You know, the 6.5% people may say, oh, alhamdulillah, of course it's alhamdulillah. But this is seen as, or shown as, demographic time bomb. That means this will explode. This will overtake this country. This country will be Muslim. This is called demographic time bomb. The country is waiting for explosion of Muslims. Bent on creating a Londonistan. You know, London is called Londonistan. Who termed it? Melanie Phillips. I read her book, and Michael Gove is his sort of spiritual student. Celsius 77, there are many different references of Melanie Gove's book called Londonistan. I think you should read this. Any Muslim activist or civic activist should read Michael Gove's Celsius 77 and Melanie Phillips' Londonistan. So London has become more or less like Pakistan, Afghanistan, it has become a Muslimistan. And there has been another theory called Eurabia, that Europe is taken over by the Arabs. These Arabs who lost control of everything, who are now just following blindly, and they're political masters in New York, in Washington or London or different places. These Arabs would be taking over whole of Europe. But these fantasy words, Londonistan, Eurabia, has been infused. It has been put in the brains of the national psyche, ordinary people. That's why many people, those who are uneducated, those who are ignorant, they are anti-Muslims. But educated Muslims, they know what is happening. If they are politically motivated to harm Muslims, then their education doesn't help. And some of them, small sections of, so alhamdulillah, are coming to Islam. Many of them are converting, especially young women, politically conscious young professional women are coming to Islam. Okay, so however, as I did quite a lot of travel in the UK. In 2006, my first year of MCB, Secretary General, I traveled 24 countries. And in 2015-16, through Citizens UK, I traveled around 12, 13 cities. So this is more or less not only amongst the Muslims, but amongst non-Muslims, civil society, and other people. And I've talked to people of all backgrounds, and I have found in neighborhoods, communities, educational institutions, workplaces, in everywhere, and in the streets, ordinary British Muslims and ordinary Muslims or Hindus or anyone, they go along quite well. Problem is the politicians, problem is the media, problem is the rich people. So Muslims and others, people of faith or no faith, get along with one another peacefully and live side by side in their daily life. This is not an issue at all. Britain's social pluralism, I must say quite a few good things about this as well. Britain's social pluralism is better than many European countries. It's still far better than, say, France, which is systematically anti-Muslims. We Muslims should not also underestimate our own achievements. We have achieved quite a lot, especially our generations, in particularly academic education and economic sectors, small businesses, not big business, charity works, Muslims are pioneer, health sectors. I think Muslim health sector professionals, doctors and others, they're around 10 to 12% in the last few decades. And educationally, Bangladesh, Pakistan its children have come above national average. So these are quite interesting as well as promising things. Okay, so there may be practical difficulties in pinning down what Islamophobia is, because at the end of the day, it's also very difficult to clarify Islamophobia. Is it racism or is it Islamophobia? So people have discussed that, because it's not based on race or color. Islamophobia is in reality, the experts say it is a cultural racism, as definition in the all-party parliamentary group proposed and accepted by Labour, London mayors and others across the country, except Tory party. It's a cultural racism. That means racism element is there. Some in the academic world call this anti-Muslim bigotry. They don't like the word Islamophobia. They call it anti-Muslim bigotry. Virtually same, but Islamophobia is wider. Criticism of Islam and Muslims is perfectly acceptable, and it was done in history in the past in any open society. But in a civilized society, no one should be allowed to hide behind acceptable criticism and display phobia or hatred or violence to others. Whatever this is called.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dr. Bari. Thank you. Just one thing, we need to clarify this was most important part of UK, especially the Islamophobia in the media. You know what I mean? This is media aggression, and a few reports, especially University of Cambridge, they have done some research on it, that mainstream media reporting about Muslim community is contributing to an atmosphere of rising hostility towards Muslim in Britain. And there is some research by Center of Media Monitoring, CFMM. You know that the 59% of all articles analyzed associated Muslim with negative behaviors. Over one-third of all articles misrepresented or generalized about Muslim, and 43% of all broadcast clips associated Muslim with negative behavior. So media is playing a big role in this case. So just tell us about a few words about the media.
Yeah, inshallah.
I will go to our next guest, Khalid, Sofi, inshallah.
Okay. The reason I'm mentioning politics, because politics leads media, and politicians, media, unfortunately, media should have been skeptic on any news unless that is proven true. But media follows political directions, because what is happening especially in the West and in many countries, politicians, rich people, and media barons, they have converged in running the world, more or less. So media just follows. It started since 9/11, and there are plenty of MCB published before this CFM document. MCB itself published documents on this, and there are other people who published that. So media is part of political establishment, and to some extent, sometimes they lead, sometimes they follow, sometimes they are complicit, sometimes they hide. So Jazakumullah khair for reminding this. So what I'm saying that whatever this is called, through media, through politics, through other, spitting at a Muslim women because of hijab, arson attacks of mosques and Islamic centers that happened after Lee Rigby murder in 2013, and desecration of Muslim graves, discrimination in the job market just because someone is a Muslim or has got Muslim name should not be tolerated. Okay, so what's the way out? Sadly, Muslims themselves are not good in presenting themselves. That's an unfortunate thing. And as mentioned, there are reasons for that. Also, there is apathy, and there is lack of interest, or probably lack of confidence or fear is also there. But Muslims are not helping themselves. One reason is majority of Muslims are still passive bystanders. They do not know what's happening, majority. Activists are in their small parallel world, and those who go into public arena have little Muslim or Islamic agenda. Some people who are hostile to the confrontational, they go into the media, they get bad name. But ever since the Runnymede Trust report on Islamophobia was published in 1997, our political and media establishments sadly failed to grapple this social ill in our midst. Political media establishment, as well as this is true for Muslim community and our religious leaders. I'm not talking about the ordinary Muslims in the street who are not that educated, who don't have the confidence, but educated Muslims and religious scholars, unlike in America. In America, there are highly capable religious scholars who are in public domain, but in our country, in Britain, there are very few who fail to wake up to the threat and spread of this anti-Muslim prejudice in our midst. So what can we do to address Islamophobia effectively? The remedy lies in education and action. as well as individual and collective interactions with all Muslims to strengthen internal Muslim civil society and all citizens through social civic engagement in breaking down barriers and building bridges of understanding for common good. Two things. One is education and interaction. Muslims should interact with themselves so that collectively we can create a Muslim civil society. It's not just Bengalis only live with Bengalis, or Islamic group lives with Islamic groups, or Pakistanis with Pakistanis. All Muslims should intermingle together, including the Black Muslims, as well as at least 100,000 white indigenous or European Muslims. We don't see any indigenous Muslim in the Muslim social discussion, unfortunately. Okay, so there are a few things I must mention. Firstly, we must invest in internal comprehensive education programs in mosques, in community organizations that promote understanding, respect, and empathy towards different cultures and religions. One should understand rooted to Islam, but understand others as well in a pluralist society where many people live. By fostering an environment of inclusivity and tolerance from a young age through positive parenting that infuses in children the required social and life skills. So parenting is fundamental in here. Giving them social and life skills are really, really important. Parents can give this better in their family than schools can do. We can challenge stereotypes and prejudices. Second, we must amplify the voices of marginalized communities. Within us, there are marginalized communities, came new and are struggling to survive. So successful Muslims should help them. Our young professionals, quite high in number, they should give something back to the community. That's one of my disappointments. I talk with my own children and others. If they give something back to the community, things will totally change. It's imperative that we create platforms for Muslims and people of color to share our experiences and perspectives openly and without fear. By listening to their stories and acknowledging their struggles, we can gain a deeper understanding of the challenges they face in the grassroots. And
Dr. Bari, we have a short of time. We need to finish your part. Yeah, go ahead.
Few minutes, inshallah. Thirdly, we must hold perpetrators of Islamophobia and racism accountable for their actions, socially as well as in media and politics. That means when politics. That means we have to come to the media. If not mainstream media, at least social media, in the language that this society understands. This includes strengthening hate crime legislation, increasing penalties for offenders, improving mechanisms for reporting and monitoring hate incidents, etc. Furthermore, we must actively promote diversity and representation in all sectors of our own community and also society, including politics, media, and the workplace. Lastly, we must cultivate interfaith and intercultural dialogue, which was really, really wonderful in the 90s and the early 2000s, and at least in the, until 2014, 2015. Things have become so weak, unfortunately. As a means of building bridges and fostering mutual understanding by engaging and in respectful and meaningful conversations with people from different backgrounds, we can break down barriers. Conclusion. Combating Islamophobia and racism requires a concerted effort from all members of society, including us. We cannot simply expect that others will change. It's we that we have to change. By embracing diversity, promoting education, amplifying voices, holding perpetrators to accounts, and promoting representation, fostering dialogue, we can create a more inclusive and equitable society for all. Motto for me and for brothers and sisters, I will suggest two things. One is we must decolonize our mind. Our brains are still in many ways colonized by European colonial history. We should read their history, our history, how we ended up in here, rather than they ended up in Europe. Europe used to go to the Muslim countries, Muslim cities for learning. We are coming now. Why did it happen? We must learn this and decolonize our mind and try to turn our number. We are sometimes, alhamdulillah, number is a big issue. Allah likes the number, big number of Muslims. Prophet ﷺ said that. But number, if not turned into quality, if this is simply a number, it is in the world, it is sad. It doesn't work. Number two, my motto, stay rooted to Islam, rooted to community. That is essential, because those who go and talk with the big things, they are not rooted to Islam, they cannot give anything to Muslims. Think big, aim high, but act locally. So this is more or less end of my talk. I will just mention few books. Just mention Islamophobia Challenge for Us, all that is mentioned by the chair, Ranimate Trust, 1997. The Islamophobia industry. I have read this book. Nathan Lean wrote this in 27. In American case, Islamophobia industry. The industry is here in this country as well. The Muslims are coming. Another book, Arun Kundani, a Hindu, originally Hindu. Islamophobia, extremism, domestic war on terror. He wrote this book in 2014. And of course, the famous fate of Abraham that we know, Why the West is Wrong About Islam by Peter Obon. Jazakumullah khair, brothers and sisters, for having patience in listening to me. And if anything that changes our actions and thinking and what we do in our life, if that happens, I'll feel privileged. May Allah help us to understand more and act more, act wisely, and face the challenge the way we should face. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
barakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Bari, for your valuable input. Now I'm going to our next guest, Khalid Sofi. Khalid is a partner and head of the charity and not-for-profit and advises on issues relating to charities and not-for-profit organization. He is also a member of the Charity Law Association. Thank you very much to join with us, Khalid Sofi. So, as you know that just last Friday, we saw a news. It was in a 12th on the metro that a 13-year-old boy was attacked in Queen's Park, Glasgow. He was walking home from a nearby mosque and was wearing a jubba. When he was attacked, he was found in a pool of blood after being stabbed while he walked home from evening prayers. We know that there is no specific law prohibiting Islamophobia in this country. However, anti-Islamic activity might be covered by more general legislation on hate crime, online abuse, and equalities. Khalid, would you please, as a expertise as a lawyer, explain us what can we do to challenge Islamophobia legally?
Jazakallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. And Assalamu alaikum, everyone. First, excellent presentation and talk by Dr. Bari. He set out really clearly the origins of Islamophobia, the current situation, and provided some very, very good action which we all should take. I think that is a very good backdrop to what we must be aware of generally and what we need to do to deal with Islamophobia as an issue, what we face. So coming on to the more specific practical actions in challenging Islamophobia, or in other words, bringing in for those who become subject of Islamophobia, what they can do. So it can be targeted against individuals, which you mentioned, and it is also at times being targeted against institutions, particularly our third sector organization, our civil society organizations. So for the purpose of individuals, obviously, in order to tackle anything, to have a legal solution, we need to have a legal framework setting out what options there are. And fortunately, we do have that legal framework. It wasn't in UK until 2010, but it is now, thanks to the excellent work of obviously our elders, the leaders of Muslim Council of Britain, and all other volunteers who work tirelessly to bring in a legislation in the form of Equalities Act, which outlawed discrimination on the basis of faith. And the faith could be described, what you described as the initial definition of Islamophobia, in terms of how they could describe, well, So there is now a legislation which outlaws discrimination on the basis of faith. It also, there are other strands of discrimination, but we will more be concerned about faith. Prior to that, there was no protection. It was unlawful to discriminate on the basis of race, color, nationality, ethnic origin, or membership in a certain group, or your gender, or even disability. But you could face less favorable treatment or discrimination because of your faith, and there was no protection. So we do have a protection. So, well, how does it work? And then we also have, again, as a result of elders working hard and MCB lobbying, an offense in criminal law called incitement to religious hatred. Similar one as we have incitement to racial hatred. That means those who engage the particular incident you mentioned, eventually, if they are prosecuted, should be prosecuted, and then if they are found to have engaged in attacks, they were motivated because of somebody's faith, they could be prosecuted for that and found guilty and sent to prison. Yeah. So there is a criminal offense. And then there is the civil protections against. So how does the discrimination work? How does the law work? So the definition is, if you are treated less favorably because of your faith in employment, in recruitment, in the provision of services, facilities, or goods. So you are denied an opportunity, you're not given a job while you're equally qualified, you're not given a promotion, you are given limited access to resources so you can make your things, or somebody refuses you to serve, whether in GP, whether other public services, or even public spaces, hotels, restaurants, shops. They all would be the acts of direct discrimination. There can be indirect discrimination as well. The definition of indirect is they apply policies, or procedures, or criteria which stop you from doing certain jobs, and then you get indirectly discriminated, and they're not reasonable ones. So if you're a Muslim and you're in a big store and they say, well, you have to deal with alcohol, but you as a Muslim can't deal with it, so you may have to leave the job. That's indirect discrimination. So those provisions now exist, both in terms of criminal law and in terms of the civil law. And I'll come on to the organizations later on. But how the real issue now is, while we have created the legal framework, while we have worked hard to bring this legislation in, but these terms of fairness, equality, discrimination, they can be abstract unless and until you have access to those means, access to justice, what we say. That's why now we fail, because you have to be empowered enough to be able to make a complaint. Then you need to be supported to present your case, get the evidence. Then you need to have resources if you want to take that organization, that individual, that employer to a tribunal or to a court. And that's why now, even if we have remedies available, we have legal avenues available, but the members of the community are unable to benefit from them and continue to fail, continue to suffer discrimination, while they could challenge because they don't have those access and means. And that's why actually the most important thing is for community organizations like yours and others start providing that practical support. In other words, advocacy services, support services, and eventually, in some most extreme cases, legal representation. So I think on practical level, while we have achieved certain things as a community, we have built a lot of mosques. The community, with all its difficulties, are responding, providing resources, attending demonstrations, responding to whatever they're told. In return, the organizations still haven't been able to create that practical support network, support base for them. So they could actually challenge it and improve their lives and not feel discriminated. So one thing is to empower community generally, what Dr. Bari said, policy change, understanding it, taking decisions. They remain there, they are the background to it, but more practically, the framework does exist, and they could constantly be improved through constant lobbying, campaigning, ensuring, but unless and until the members of the community, especially those members of the community who are not empowered enough, don't have the education, don't have the resources, don't have the confidence of wearing hijab and go to the services and not getting it or not being serviced or can't communicate effectively, need that practical support. And so that the benefit of legislation will come to it and they can challenge. And that would eventually also help tackle Islamophobia widely, because you will have the data, you will have the information, you would have empowered community, authorities would know that they will be challenged. So that framework really has to be created. And I think all our community organizations, the bigger ones, do now have the network. They have the mosques, they have the people coming up, they just have to shift from what they do. They'll continue to do that. Of course, we have to have facilities for prayers, we have to do our Ramadan, we have to do our Quran, we have to do, but I think they are there. They just have to move beyond that and start creating that support network, providing that individual support to the members of the community who face discrimination, who face Islamophobia, and that will empower the community on a more practical way. That is something I think is seriously lacking in our country. And it does have to have grassroots support, and from grassroots organizations who, if they can organize it, they can really tap into a lot of other resources which are available there, whether through Students' Advice, through Students UK, and then bring that in and empower the community. So otherwise, legal framework exists, thanks to the work which our elders did, but legal framework is not being accessed. And then it means nothing. So if you've got a mobile phone, this mobile phone, when it is switched off, it's got no power. When it's switched on, behind the scenes, there are a lot of things being worked out, masks, software, hardware, which allows it that energy to become live. And that's what you have to do in order to get practical support to the members of the community, so they feel empowered. When I was doing this work, before I got to it, I was working on an individual basis. When you do this to an individual, you can see their eyes light up. They feel empowered. You can see a clear difference that they feel, okay, someone is going to advocate for us. Sometimes they may just need a letter writing. It doesn't have to be always legal, the basic support. Letter writing, picking up a phone, or telling them this is form to be filled in, telling them all those things. So that is one more practical thing which I think needs to be put in place in order to benefit from legal challenges. This legal challenges on its own, just simply saying framework is there is not good enough, but that exists. Now I'll come on to the organizations. So there is no such law which would prohibit or make it unlawful to discriminate against organizations or institutions. They can't, because they're not individuals. The whole law framework of nation is built around individual. But you still sometimes get disproportionately picked up, particularly from regulators from service providers. So how do we deal there? Again, there you have to be able to challenge it. But that means looking into your own organizations, ensuring that you are in full compliance of what the law tells you. So if a regulator comes, you can show it, get the necessary institutions and things in place, so you don't face that. But and that is, again, these organizations then get a little bit they are not able to function properly. They feel inhibited by, so regulators may come, the charity commission may come, others may come. They may come, that's fine. But as long as you have actually been able to comply with the law, have the systems introduced, have the systems in place, have followed all of the procedures, you can challenge them and tell them this is there. And then there are legal routes available to challenge those decisions as well. But this all comes down to two things, which is empowerment, to have the understanding, have the resources, have the professionalism to take it forward. That is. Have you got a meeting here? Oh, 5 minutes. I'll just give it free here. Okay. So, okay, that is what I have to say. I have to finish this off in about maximum 2-3 minutes because there's another meeting in this room. Yeah. So that is all I would say you have to do. Hello?
Hello.
Yes.
Thanks, Khalid, for your valuable, the information about the, the legal side of the Islamophobia, how we can face Islamophobia in legal side. So you know that just a few comments before you go. If you see the police record and everything, 2023, the 44%, the religious hate crimes recorded, against Muslim to the police. And the recent one in 2023, the Tell Mama report evidence that rising tension in the Middle East can lead to an increase in anti-Muslim and anti-Semitic incidents in the UK. So, and only just for 2 months, 7 October to 19th of November, Tell Mama recorded 895 anti-Muslim cases, both online and offline. So it's a kind of a flooded of the information over there as well. So at this moment, like only the few organizations like Tell Mama and other voluntary man organization working on the field, but they are not available for our Muslim community. In this case, what your suggestion and how we can as a community, give support to the people who are, affected by Islamophobia?
Yeah. So the answer is the same what I said before. You just have to put your own resources in it and deal with it. Yes. You just have to you just have to organize yourselves. Community have to organize this and not move away from, but start using resources, not heavily on mosques. Buildings have been built on these sophisticated organizations. Okay, so I'll have to go now. Is that okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time and join with us. Thank you very much to our both guests to their time, and we believe that this discussion will help us to combat Islamophobia in the UK. The MCA has been actively working to tackle Islamophobia and to mark the UN Day to combat Islamophobia. Islamophobia is pervasive throughout our society and is deep seated at an institutional level. Therefore, to tackle and highlight this issue, MCA has encouraged Muslim communities across the UK to write to their MPs and raise the awareness of these challenges. May Allah help all of us to face this challenge. May Allah give us the tawfiq. So, Jazakallah khairan, all of our viewers who listen this program. And there is an announcement from tomorrow. Our same program, Ramadan with Quran, will be started from 2:30. So the program will continue tomorrow as well. The program will be started 2:30. Jazakallah khairan once again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
মোহিত অফ করছেন, লাইভ অফ করছেন? আব্দুল মোহিত ভাই